Hi, I'm Dr. Elsie Cook, and I welcome you to another episode of On Mission with Elsie. Today, America celebrates its 246th Independence Day. What follows next is a short interview with my husband on the significance of July 4th. Enjoy. What is the significance of July 4th in American history?
July 4th, 1776 is when American Congress of States, known as the Continental Congress, voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence.
What was the historical context behind the Declaration of Independence?
Well, the colonies had been working up to that since about a generation earlier with the French and Indian War. Back then, the mother country, England, had helped the colonies fight the French and kind of secure their frontier borders. And so the Americans were very pleased with the help from the British. But then in the next subsequent decades, British authorities said, well, you colonies will have to help pay for all that help we gave you. So they started raising the taxes on the colonists and more taxes. The colonists would then start to protest, and they would ask for representation in Parliament. They weren't given any representation in Parliament in England, and so more and more of the Americans felt that their liberties were being lost, and seemed like all the work that they were doing, the products they were producing, all their riches were going over to England to pay taxes. So they're basically just working for the benefit of England and not for themselves. By the 1770s, more and more people were clamoring for this idea of liberty. Some people were even calling for independence, but basically the colonists just wanted England to back off. But this came to a head in 1775 when England sent some British troops to march into Massachusetts and take colonial arms. But this time there was a militia of colonists waiting for them, and that's when shots were fired, and that's what sparked what we call the Revolutionary War, or the War for Independence. That was in April 1775. So by July 1776, the colonies are now at war with England. A lot of the colonists believed that at the end of the war we would still be a colony of England, and that the war was being fought mainly so we could get more liberty from England, that they would back off and give concessions. But there was now also a huge growing segment of the population that wanted independence. So now representatives from the 13 colonies had gathered in Philadelphia to debate the idea of whether or not the colonies should push for independence. So that's kind of the background as to how the Declaration of Independence came to be. The Continental Congress first had to agree that by unanimous consent that we wanted independence. Then we had to vote to make that resolution official. So we did that on July 2nd.
What is the content of the Declaration of Independence?
Well, the Declaration of Independence says quite a few things. Begins with kind of a philosophical statement on the nature of man's rights, how they ought to be governed. It also gives a list of very specific grievances, listing those grievances as reasons as to why the colonists were declaring their independence. A very famous early passage is the statement of, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." So the writer Thomas Jefferson makes a point that, we're not making this up. These truths should be self-evident to everyone, including the King of England. That all men are created equal, which is a revolutionary thought back then, because there was a definite hierarchy of people who were upper class, lower class, servants, even slaves. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, God, with certain inalienable rights. So every man has God-given rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So every individual has the right to pursue life, liberty, and to pursue their own mode of happiness.
What is the role of government in relation to these rights that were outlined in the Declaration of Independence?
Well, when any form of government becomes destructive of these rights, then the people have the right to abolish that government and create a new one for themselves.
Who were the people involved in the writing of the Declaration of Independence?
Initially, there was some debate amongst the leading congressmen at the convention as to who should write the Declaration. John Adams was put forth as a person to write it, as was Benjamin Franklin. But John Adams decided that it should be a young Virginian named Thomas Jefferson who should write it. Jefferson believed that Adams should write it, but John Adams said, well, I'm too unpopular, my opinions are too strong, a lot of people think I'm obnoxious and opinionated, you're more well-liked, you're a Virginian, and besides, you're the best writer, so Mr. Thomas Jefferson, you should be the one to write it. And so Jefferson agreed, and he did a remarkable job. By the way, as far as George Washington's attendance, he did not sign because he was the general of the Continental Army and he was out in the field with the troops, so he was not one of the signers.
I understand that not everybody signed the Declaration of Independence. There were about 8 who did not sign. But for those who signed, what was the implication?
The first general implication is that as a member of Congress, you're officially affixing your name to this formal Declaration of Independence, saying as a representative of, say, the state of New Jersey, I am for the Declaration of Independence. I'm standing behind everything that it says. The more serious implication is that by affixing your name to the Declaration of Independence, you will probably be among the first people sought out by the British government to be arrested and tried for treason in case the colonies lose the war. And if you're found guilty of treason, it's very logical to presume that you'll be hanged. Now, the only way to avert this fate, of course, is for the American colonists to win the war. In the summer of 1776, that didn't look like a very good prospect, because even at the point when they voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence, a huge fleet of the British Army was now harbored in New York, and they were about ready to engage General Washington for the city of New York, and they very nearly squashed the Continental Army in New York that summer, but only a miraculous fog allowed Washington and his troops to narrowly escape. So the signers of the Declaration of Independence, yeah, they very nearly did sign their own death warrant.
Did the signing of the Declaration of Independence ended the Revolutionary War?
It did not end the war. In fact, there was about 6 more years of the war to be fought. In an ideal world, the Declaration would end the war, because once the Declaration was delivered, King George would supposedly say, okay, they've declared their independence, it's over, withdraw the troops. But of course, King George wasn't about to do that. In fact, by the time the Declaration was signed, America had been in armed conflict with England for about a year and 3 months. So at the time the Declaration was signed, the Continental Army was just really getting heated up into the conflict. But anyway, the war did go on for another 6 years. The Declaration, in fact, gave the soldiers of the Continental Army something specific to fight for, because whereas prior to the Declaration, they were really only fighting to get England to back off and give them some more rights, and the Declaration made it official. This war was for liberty, all or nothing. An implication for today would be that fight for our liberties continues even in 2022. Today, some of our, what Jefferson would call our inalienable rights and given to us by God to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One of those would be, say, freedom of religion. Those are now coming increasingly under attack by even our own government. The fight for our liberties definitely continues today. So this July 4th, hopefully these will be some points that we can all ponder. Have a great Independence Day.